What's going on, everyone? Today is November 12th of 2022, and welcome back to this edition of the Superstream. My name is Derek, author and webmaster of Gematrinator.com. Good to have you back on this Saturday. Hope everyone's having a good weekend. Got a lot of decodes for you, some really good ones in this video. In this video, as we do always in every Superstream, we cover the last week in news, mainstream media, and celebrity deaths. And we discuss how all of these events are panning out through a numerical code that combines Gematria with dates on the calendar. These practices have been part of human history for a very long time, really ever since the existence of numbers themselves. Chronomancy is a divination technique that revolves around doing things on a particular date or at a certain time, often connected to astrology or astronomy. And you'll see that Wikipedia, for instance, says that this tactic is especially popular in China. And this is a common thing that Wikipedia does, is that they like to convince you that all of this funny business is going on in other parts of the world, but here in America, we don't hide anything from our citizens. We see something similar on the page for Gematria, which is consistently referred to as a Jewish or Greek practice, with very little mention of English Gematria. In fact, the most basic ciphers that I teach aren't mentioned on this page, because if people saw how logical and how simple this language was, they would see that something is certainly going on when it comes to the mainstream media. As a perfect example of this, we had this bizarre story this week from KFC in Germany. Now, KFC has had over 100 restaurants for more than a decade, and they've been there in that country for a lot longer than that. However, this year, on November 9th, which is the anniversary of Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass, on this date in 1938, the Nazi Party attacked many Jewish businesses in the area, and many people died as a result of this attack. And obviously, this would be a very sorrowful day in Jewish culture. However, in Germany, KFC decided this was a good idea and a good time to run a promotion, sending a message out to people who were subscribed to their alert services, saying that, hey, we have a special running on Kristallnacht. And obviously, this was very distasteful. So how come after all these years of operating in Germany, KFC didn't make this mistake until this year? Their explanation for this mistake is completely ridiculous. It was, an error in our system. And, these alerts just go out. They're linked to calendars that include observances. We have no idea what's going on, is essentially their response. However, when you have knowledge of chronomancy, gematria, and other tenets of numerology, stories like this actually make sense. So while most of the world is scratching their head and just laughing at how a mistake like this could occur, we dive a little deeper and explain why this quote-unquote mistake occurred on the date it did. This particular riddle is connected to the numerology of Colonel Sanders, the famous founder of KFC, which is formerly Kentucky Fried Chicken. Of course, Kentucky, the one state in the United States that kind of looks like a piece of fried chicken. Colonel Sanders was born on September 9th of 1890. So notice how this is the 9th day of the month. In fact, it was the 9th month. Well, Kristallnacht also occurred on the 9th of the month. Notice how it was even the 11th month. And 9 times 11 is 99. A lot like Colonel Sanders' birthday, September 9th, 99. Well, if you measure from his birthday to the date of Kristallnacht in 1938, you get a measurement of exactly 48 years and 2 months. In a very significant form of gematria I teach, called Latin, or Agrippa's Key, formerly called Jewish gematria on my website, the word Kristallnacht has gematria of 482. tying in perfectly to the age of Colonel Sanders on the date of Kristallnacht. So let's look closer at this date, the 9th of November, which is the 9th day on the 11th month. This is an ideal date for tragedy in the Jewish community. This traces back to the ancient holiday Tisha B'Av, which is a Jewish fast day reserved for commemorating the destruction of the two temples, both Solomon's temple and the Second Temple, both destroyed in Jerusalem. Tisha B'Av translates literally to the 9th of Av, and Av is the 11th month on the civil calendar in Hebrew. So, in ancient Jewish history, the two temples were both destroyed on the 9th day of the 11th month. Kristallnacht occurred on the 9th day of the 11th month on the Gregorian calendar. And then, on the 11th day of the 9th month on the Gregorian calendar, we had the September 11th attacks here in the United States, which destroyed the two twin towers, much like the two temples being destroyed on Tisha B'Av. It just so happens that the same date that KFC ran this promotion in Germany, the U.S. government quietly declassified several 9/11 interviews with the men who occupied the White House at the time, George Bush and Dick Cheney. And this is just part of this riddle. The U.S. government, mainstream media, all working in accordance to keep the public that reads this nonsense retarded. And I use that term in the most loving sense possible. Now, here we see Wednesday, the date that these documents were released. Well, Wednesday was November 9th, the same date that KFC made this error. Now, next we're going to look at how this story is also aligned with the date of the September 11th attacks. And we start with Colonel Sanders, whose real name sums to 119 in reverse reduction gematria. This cipher simply flips the alphabet backwards so that Z is 1, Y is 2, through A is 26, and then reducing each double-digit number to a single digit, also called Pythagorean numerology. So, in that method, Harland David Sanders sums to 119, just like the date, the 11th of September, or, the 9th of Av would be written on the Jewish calendar. The holiday Tisha B'Av has gematria of 9/11 in the ancient Latin/Jewish method. This is so important that even our calendar, November 9th, when you write this date out as it's spelled, this date has gematria of 1109, exactly as the date would be written here in the United States. The date September 11th falls on the 254th day of the Gregorian calendar. Well, if you measure from September 11th, back in 2001, to the date of this news story, which was published on the 10th, the day after, notice how it was exactly 254 months later, from 9/11/2001 to November 10th, 2002, exactly 254 months. If you instead write out Colonel Harland David Sanders in the calculator, you'll find that you get an ordinal value of 254. This using the standard 26-letter alphabetic order, where each letter is numbered 1 through 26. 254. And here we are 254 months after 9/11, which was on the 254th day of the year. There's something else that stood out about this date. It's also exactly 7,730 days. Well, in numerology, zeros are ignored, so this represents the number 773, which is the 137th prime number. And the name Colonel Harland David Sanders also sums to 137 in Latin. In English gematria, Colonel Harland David Sanders also has this 11-9 gematria. So this all lines up way too well to be a coincidence. And again, how could a mistake like this be possible? This would never happen to a smaller business that actually has to worry about whether or not it will remain in business. But KFC, the second largest food chain in the entire world, they'll be all right, no matter if a few people boycott them or not. So they can do this kind of stuff. Now, there's more that I wanted to share regarding the numerology of this story. Notice how Colonel Sanders, first of all, has gematria of 222, like the year we're in, 2022, but check out the alphabetic ordinal value of 156. Colonel Sanders and Harlan Sanders both also equal 75 with the S exception. These are the same values in 666, as well as triple sixes. This number 156 is so significant because the number 911 is the 156th prime number. Now, if you flip the digits 666 upside down, you end up with the number 999. And I pointed out earlier how Colonel Sanders was born on September 9th, the date written 9/9. Well, if you measure from his date of birth to the date he died, December 16th of 1980, notice how he died at the age of exactly 90 years and 99 days. 666 in numerology is called the number of the beast. Notice how beast has a value of 198 in Latin gematria. Those are the same digits in both the year he was born and the year he died. Notice how the phrase the beast matches Sanders in gematria. They share 80, 26, and 46 values. Kentucky Fried Chicken has gematria overlap with the number 666, as well as the headline that was given to us by CNN Business. And there's even more to this 666. If you add the digits in 666, you get a sum of 18. Well, measuring from the date of Kristallnacht back in 1938 to the date of this KFC blunder, notice how you get exactly 1,008 months. Colonel Sanders was born on and died on a date with 108 numerology. Finally, this has also been 84 years since Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass. And in the language of gematria, notice how 84 years has the same values as both Night of Broken Glass and Kristallnacht. And that's really all there is to this story. Yes, this alert really did go out, but no, it wasn't a mistake. And I found it interesting that TMZ, who is well aware of this language, chose to screen cap this tweet 33 minutes after it was posted. Of course, 33, a big stamp of the occult and numeric ritual. In the next part of this video, I want to talk about a news story that broke yesterday. Big news out of the world of cryptocurrency, as this newcomer to the crypto game, FTX, which really blew up over the past couple years, suddenly failed and has now filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, once again, yesterday's date was November 11th, which is the date written 11/11, both in the United States and around the rest of the world. Bankruptcy in the United States is filed through something called Chapter 11 or Title 11 of the United States Bankruptcy Code. So ask yourself, what are the odds that one of the largest bankruptcy filings in modern American history made headline news on 11/11 when bankruptcy is exactly connected to the 11/11 code through United States legislature? And also think about this name, Bankman-Fried. A lot of people who are getting into crypto are attempting to free themselves from the bankman. I also see the word fried in here, and now this bankman is fried. It's being told that he has a net value of actual 0. So this name is ridiculous. Crypto has turned into something completely ridiculous. I don't try to talk too much about crypto because a lot of this is over my head. I do see value in something like Bitcoin, which has infrastructure behind it, something I can use at businesses around the area here where I live. But the vast, vast majority of cryptocurrency seems to be nothing more than a pyramid scheme. People get paid to promote these things, and then they balloon up, and then they collapse. And this seems to be by design in some cases, and definitely the case with FTX. So let's take a look at how old Mr. Bankman-Fried was on the date of this news story yesterday. So here we see he's a span of 251 days after his birthday. In a significant ciphers that takes capital letters into account, notice how the phrase 1111 sums to 251 using this cipher. 251 is the 54th prime number, and 1111 also equals 54 in both reduction methods. In fact, so does FTX exchange, the name of the exchange that essentially collapsed this week. This year, and every year for that matter, November 11th is the date that leaves 50 days on the Gregorian calendar. Using the standard alphabetic order, the company FTX has a numeric value of 50. This place is headquartered in the Bahamas, a Bahamian exchange. Notice how Bahamian equals 50. And now they're bankrupt. And the word bankrupt also equals 50. There's been a celebrity who's been in the news regarding FTX and its collapse. As it turns out, NFL player Tom Brady stands to lose a lot of money from this fallout with FTX. And this made me laugh a little bit because the name Brady sums to 50, just like FTX in the alphabetic order. Also worth mentioning that yesterday had reduced numerology of 10 if you add all the digits in yesterday's date. And in reduction, FTT equals 10. FTT is the name of the token that FTX features on exchanges. So a little more about this riddle, right? Here we have a guy with the name Bankman trying to change how man does its banking. Well, the name Sam Bankman-Fried, as well as Samuel Bankman-Fried, has some pretty interesting overlap with the word money in Gematria. Notice 1,240 and 656, the same digits found in his name. When you write the word money out, notice how you get a reverse value of 63, which matches 11, the big number of this bankruptcy filing. Bankman-Fried was born on the 6th day of March, or 6/3. And when he launched FTX, which according to this site was officially on the date May 8th, he was 63 days after his 27th birthday. Money and 11 both equal 27 as well. Now, if you measure from the date that FTX was established to the date of its bankruptcy, you get 3 years, 6 months, and 3 days, which of course has the same digits as 63, also connecting to his lunar age on that date. In numerology, there's a pair of irrational numbers that we'll discuss throughout this video. One of these is the golden ratio, a highly significant ratio that is connected to the Fibonacci sequence. And these numbers were coded into this story. First, check out the birth numerology of Sam Bankman-Fried. If you add all the digits as you say them out loud, 3 plus 6 plus 19 plus 92, this has a sum of 120. Notice how chapter 11, with the ones added in reduced fashion, has gematria of 120. He also has birth numerology representing 11. But back to this 120. 120 is the ordinal value of golden ratio. And think about the Greek alphabet, where there is a letter called phi, and the golden ratio is also known as phi. Now, in Greek isopsephy, the letter phi has a numeric value of 500. So phi, 500, very easy to remember. Well, in Latin Gematria, when you write out 500, check this out. You get the digits 1061. This is like the first 3 digits of phi, which begins with 1.61. 1.61. 500 equals 1061. You also get a 116 in ordinal and a 181, which sticks out as well because, 1618. So this is all pretty relevant. Well, look how old Sam Bankman-Fried was on the date of this news story. He was exactly 1,601 weeks old. 161. This is a man who graduated from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which just so happens to be 161 years old. By the way, this 1601 is a prime number, the 252nd. Numbers found in both Fried and MIT. I put a little blurb at the end of this post because I found this last name, Bankman-Fried, to be not only relevant to this allegorical decode, but also ridiculous because it's his parents that gave him this name, right? He doesn't have a middle name. He has 2 last names, Bankman-Fried. I think his dad was named Bankman. His mom was named Fried. And I just get annoyed when I see this because what if this guy marries a girl whose parents gave her 2 last names? Are they supposed to give their kids 4 last names? Just feels a little pretentious. Has nothing to do with the decode. If you want more of my thoughts on cryptocurrency and what's going on in that world, check out my blog. And, I think if done right, cryptocurrency is probably better than what we have now. In fact, I think almost anything would be better than what we have now with the Federal Reserve and how that operates. Something better needs to be built. I would certainly like to be part of that. What that something is, we got a long ways to go, but you see what they're doing with money. They're really trying to get people from every angle. And I feel like cryptocurrency has been framed as an investment when in actuality, it's just a gamble. Particularly with all these new coins that don't have any infrastructure behind them. All right, on to the next story. Next up, I want to talk about 3 stories that are interrelated. And this all has to do with crises. The first of which was the cryptocurrency crisis that I just covered. On the same date, November 11th, we got news that actor Rainn Wilson changed his name to address the climate crisis. And throughout this decode, you will see many of the same numbers that you will see in the next decode, which has to do with the border crisis. Yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security announced that Chris Magnus is set to be fired from his role if he doesn't resign. And this riddle is actually connected to chess player Magnus Carlsen. So we'll explore that in a little bit. But first, let's talk about Rainn Wilson and why November 11th is such an intriguing date for him to go and change his name on social media. Rainn Wilson achieved fame for his role on the television series The Office, where he won nominations for Outstanding Supporting Actor. Well, in the series The Office, his character, Dwight Schrute, ends up getting married to a woman named Angela Martin. And in the series The Office, Angela Martin has a birthday of November 11th. Consider how November 11th, or 1111, is often referred to as an angel number. This is a number that many people say helps wake them up to this alternate side of reality with angels, spirits, demons, things of the sort. Think about how this wake-up number has been stamped into culture. We have this Alex Jones character, the ultimate conspiracy theorist. His name equals 1111. And I guess for more of the organic side, and maybe that is organic, my name, Derek Takori, also has this value of 1111, and I've gotten many messages from people telling me that I've helped wake them up. In fact, you may have first heard of me when I used to co-host the Gematria Effect, which also has this Gematria of 911 in trigonal. But that part aside, 1111, the angel number, and here we have this character named Angela, right, which comes from angel. So what an appropriate birthday. In fact, it's said that she was born in Dayton, Ohio, and Dayton, Ohio has matching gematria with 1111. 3 weeks ago, I had a Discord conversation with a friend of mine because I noted that Jim Cornette, a famous figure in the pro wrestling business, has a striking similarity to Dwight Schrute. And I asked my friend and business associate Adam whether he agreed, and he was like, holy crap. Yes, absolutely, these people look alike. And then I showed him the gematria. The name Dwight Schrute, which is the character of Rainn Wilson in The Office, has almost perfect matching gematria with Jim Cornette. In fact, Dwight Schrute has a full name on the series, and that even matches Jim Cornette in gematria. And then you can take this a step further and look at their birth numerologies. Rainn Wilson and Jim Cornette both have the same birth numerology, 106, 43, and 87. 106 not only connects to Jim Cornette's full name, but also the state of Kentucky where he's from. Kentucky sums to 106 and 43. And just think about these two guys, right? Dwight Schrute is like this meme-type character that people think of when they think of someone who takes their job too seriously. That was really what Dwight was all about. He just took his job way too seriously, over the top. Jim Cornette is now a critic of the wrestling industry. And I actually listen to this guy sometimes because I still follow wrestling. I don't really watch it so often, but the business itself fascinates me. And Cornette is an old school guy who takes the wrestling business really seriously. It's like he doesn't get that most people understand, or everyone understands wrestling is scripted, but to me, this is all not a mistake. And Jim Cornette pissed a lot of people off in the wrestling industry, so it wouldn't surprise me that they would make fun of him like this. Now, Jim Cornette is from Louisville, Kentucky, and this brings us to the next part of this riddle. Back in May, we had the 148th running of the Kentucky Derby, and if you do a search on my YouTube channel, you'll find my video on this race, which is one of my best videos I've ever done. This year was the 148th running of the Kentucky Derby. Notice how the name Rainn Wilson equals 148, and his full name, Rainn Percival Dietrich Wilson, also sums to 148 in reduction. If you write out Kentucky Derby, you get a value of 56 and 70. And these are the two numbers that tell us why Rainn Wilson is the right person to promote climate change. Climate change equals 56 and 70. And in the alphabetic order, Rainn equals 56, Wilson equals 70 in reverse. Also notice how climate change equals 101, like the number 11. This all happening on 11/11. Back in 2016, world leaders gathered in Paris, France, to sign an agreement to limit greenhouse gases. Paris, France sums to both 56 and 70. Greenhouse gases also sums to 70. And when you think about climate change and public figures, perhaps there are few that come to mind before Greta Thunberg, who is this activist at the forefront of this Fridays for Future movement, where students are encouraged to leave class on Friday to go protest for climate change. And you see how they control the minds of the youth through bullshit like this. Hey, if you skip school, you can protest. Well, of course people are going to protest because they get to skip school. It's not that they really believe in all this climate change nonsense. And yeah, the climate is changing a little bit, but what's causing it? That's the question. Notice how the name Greta Thunberg also has this 70 value. And Thunberg is from Sweden. And Sweden equals 70. But you have to also appreciate how Sweden is a perfect Gematria match with Wilson. The name Rainn, also 29 and 34. So let's talk about how this is connected to Louisville a little more. In my next part of this decode, we'll talk about Magnus, Chris Magnus, being forced to quit on the same day as this news story. Well, the name Magnus means great. And the word great has the same letters as Greta. Now, Louisville, Kentucky, where Jim Cornette is from, is home to the Louisville Cardinals. Magnus Carlsen, a couple of months ago, suddenly quit a chess tournament in St. Louis, and St. Louis is home to baseball's Cardinals. Now, this year's Kentucky Derby was a Jesuit magic ritual, and think about how Cardinals are connected to the Jesuit order through the Catholic Church. This will make more sense as I go. The Jesuits have Gematria of 136. This is the same as the city of Louisville, 136. In fact, Kentucky also sums to 136 with capital letters. This year's Kentucky Derby was a huge upset with the horse Rich Strike pulling through. And notice how Rich Strike, Epicenter, and Zandon, the three horses to win Place Show in the Kentucky Derby, have Gematria of 136 and 1336. The Jesuit order sums to 1336, and the Jesuits equal 136. Well, if you measure from Greta Thunberg's birthday to the date that Rainn Wilson changed his name, you get exactly 1,036 weeks. Notice how Greta Thunberg has matching numbers with Louisville, Kentucky. Now, on November 9th is when Rainn Wilson actually tweeted his update on social media. It wasn't until the 11th when mainstream outlets picked this up. But again, it was November 9th when he made this tweet. Now, why is November 9th so significant? Well, in my post on the Kentucky Derby, I pointed out how the winner, who was Rich Strike, was in his 1109th day of his age for the race on May 7th. 1109 is the Jewish Gematria of James Cornette, which is, of course, Jim's real name, James Cornette, 1109. Just like November 9th, the way the date is written, 1109. And on 1109 this year, November 9th, we had a basketball game between the Louisville Cardinals and the Bellarmine Knights, who are also from the city of Louisville. Now, Bellarmine was a big topic of contention in the NCAA last year because even though they won their conference tournament, they weren't allowed to play in the NCAA tournament. And now Bellarmine upsets Louisville on the same day as this big Louisville ritual with Rainn Wilson and Jim Cornette. If you measure from the Paris Agreement to November 9th, you get 6 years and 6 days. And if you measure to November 11th, you get 6 years and 7 days. Of course, one of these was a span. And this connects to the score of the game, 67 to 66. In the next post, we'll talk about how the number 66 and 67 is completely coded into this story about Magnus. Don't worry, this will make sense. Before I get there, I want to talk more about this guy, Kenny Payne, who was recently hired to become the new head coach of the Louisville basketball team. Notice how the name Kenneth Victor Payne has matching Gematria with James E. Cornette, which was Jim Cornette's ring name in professional wrestling. Particularly this number 303 with capital letters. Kenneth Victor Payne, James E. Cornette, both 303. Well, when you write the number 33 out, it sums to 895. If you measure from the birthday of Jim Cornette to Kenneth Payne, you get 1,895 days. And the Louisville Cardinals entered this season with exactly 1,895 wins in school history. I mean, what are the odds of this alignment? It's ridiculous. So let's talk about how the number 66 is coded in here. First of all, Kenny Payne, this guy, his name has matching gematria with 66. The city of Louisville is named after Louis XVI, which also sums to 41 and 49, like 66. Well, Kenny Payne was born in the year 66. Rainn Wilson was born in the year 66. The Bellarmine Knights, who upset Louisville on this date, finished last year with a 606 winning percentage. When Kenny Payne got hired on as the head coach of Louisville, Jim Cornette had just turned 60 years and 6 months old one day earlier. Rainn Wilson gets his name from Rainn. Rainn equals 66. Rainn Wilson is a doppelganger of Jim Cornette. Doppelganger equals 666, or 66. Climate change equals 606. This is a riddle for Kentucky, which equals 660. Rainn Wilson changed his name, which equals 66. Dwight Schrute equals 66. Jim Cornette equals 66. The 66th prime number is 317, which is Cornette's full name with his nickname. And check out how 66 has matching gematria with Rainn Wilson and Kentucky. So let's talk about this number 66. Think about how 66 is the 11th triangular number. And here we are on 11/11, November 11th, talking about this number. In the next story, we have Chris Magnus, the head of the United States Customs and Border Protection, being fired, or being told to resign anyway, by Alejandro Mayorkas. So check this out. Chris Magnus. His name equals 66. And he's head of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which sums to 366. The abbreviation USCBP sums to 366 in Sumerian. Chris Magnus was born on October 26th, which leaves 66 days in the year. His name equals 66, and when he got hired, he was 6 weeks, 6 days after his birthday, and the date he was hired had primary numerology of 66. He was hired by the head of the Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, whose name equals 66. And when Mayorkas told him he has to resign, it was 660 days into the term of his boss, Joe Biden. Now, the number 66 is the reduction value of 33, and 66 is also the first multiple of 33. The names Chris and Magnus both equal 33. And November 11th fell 333 days after he was hired, or a span of 33 days before the anniversary. But I want you to think more about this name Magnus, and whether or not you know of another celebrity named Magnus. What about this guy? Magnus Carlsen, the #1 chess player in the world. Magnus is from Norway, which, when I spell it right, sums to 33 and 333 with prime numbers. Now, just a couple months ago, Magnus Carlsen was involved in this huge controversy with this new chess player. And this new chess player, Hans Niemann, he's really young, only 19 years old, but he somehow beat the world's #1 in chess. Not only that, but he beat him using the black pieces, meaning he went second. And this was an incredibly rare loss for Magnus, who never loses to people of his rank. In fact, a lot of analysts said that Magnus played terrible in this game. So what probably happened is that he threw it. And this controversy has no precedent in chess. A lot of experts are saying, no one's ever just resigned from a tournament without saying anything before. And that's what happened in September. So think about the name Neiman, who was the opponent who was accused of cheating. The name Neiman means new man, and as such, the name was most likely used for someone who was new to town, who had recently moved to a new location. Well, Chris Magnus is the head of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which seeks to keep immigrants from being your new neighbor in town. So we see how immigrants are coded into this guy's name. Neiman, like new guy in town. And check out the name Hans Moke Neiman. It sums to 66. And this guy is now a chess grandmaster, which equals 66. With the S exception, Magnus Carlsen equals 66. And he's from Norway, which equals 66. Notice how Norway also equals 96. And November 11th was 66 days after 9/6. Now, 9/6, September 6th this year, this is when news broke that Magnus Carlsen had quit this tournament. He had actually quit the tournament on September 5th, one day earlier, which was 67 days before November 11th. And this is part of this whole 66-67 connection, which I explained in my last post, the Bellarmine-Louisville game, 67-66. Now, if you check out Magnus Carlsen's age on this date, he was born on November 30th of 1990. So he has the 66, and then when you include the end date, it changes to 67. And look at this gematria. 66 equals 67. Magnus Carlsen equals 607. St. Louis, Missouri, where this tournament was held. That sums to 67. Here we have a story about a border crisis, which equals 67. We'll talk about how this is connected to a total solar eclipse, 67. Norway, 96. The name Neiman, 96. Chess Grandmaster, 96. Like September 6th, the date that Magnus Carlsen was in the mainstream media. So I want to talk more about Magnus Carlsen and this really interesting birthday he has of November 30th. But first, I want to point out how the word eclipse equals 66 in the Latin ordinal method. When you write out 66 in ordinal, it sums to 149. Remember, this was the gematria of Rainn Wilson, 149. But using capital letters, the name Magnus sums to 149. The name Magnus comes from Latin, where it means great. We pointed out how this was connected to Greta. Well, in astronomy, we have these two eclipses, which people are calling the two great American eclipses. So in 2017, we had the first great American eclipse. And in 2024, we have the second great American eclipse. Well, Magnus Carlsen, this story on November 11th, falling 149 days before the date of the next great American eclipse. Now, notice how Fox News talked about these immigrants crossing in Normandy, Texas. This is one of the cities where people are crossing from Mexico into Texas at extremely high rates. And why is Normandy chosen here? Well, first of all, the city of Normandy sits directly in the path of the 2024 Great American Eclipse. And see how close it is to the greatest eclipse point in Mexico. The Normandy landings fell on June 6th, the date written 6-6, part of this huge 66 riddle that we're looking at. So Magnus was born on November 30th, and when you write out November 30th in Gematria, it sums to 1331, like 1331 eclipse. And the 1331 total eclipse took place on November 30th. And I have an entire post on this. It's linked in many of my posts. And it explains why 1331 is this massive eclipse number. It's so coded into our language that if you deny it, I have no respect for your intelligence whatsoever. Now, when Chris Magnus took office, Magnus Carlsen was 31 years and 13 days old. He was also 1,619 weeks old, and that stands out because the number 1331 doesn't appear in pi, another irrational number, until the 16,019th digit. And when you write out 16,019, it sums to 1331, just like the numbers 133 and 331, which can be combined to make the number 1331. In fact, if you measure from the 1331 eclipse to the date that Magnus Carlsen was born, it was exactly 659 years. 659 is the 120th prime number. 120 is the ordinal value of Grandmaster. Grandmaster sums to 120. So does the word eclipse. Here we have this chess grandmaster born on the date of the most significant eclipse in history. And he's got the numbers that line up perfectly. This is pretty trippy stuff, isn't it? And, you know, if you ask me whether or not this is all rigged or organic, I mean, I definitely think there's at least an organic element to this. It seems like what the government is doing is tapping into what's going on in the organic matrix and paying tribute to it through news stories like this. You know, just lying to us every day through the media. Because these people who run the media are Kabbalists, occultists. And as occultists, they are hiding knowledge from you. But as Kabbalists, they must also practice that knowledge at the same time. And I truly believe that's what we're seeing play out here. So just for a better example, perhaps, of how important astronomy is to the mainstream culture, we're going to talk about Election Day this past week and why a former NFL running back, Herschel Walker, is now running for the Senate. And this is just a furthering of the merging of politics and sports in American culture. These things have been coded together for decades. Sports, politics, for those with knowledge of numerology, it's been very clear to see that this is all scripted together. But now it's taking an extra step. People like Herschel Walker are not only coded alongside political events, but they are now actually participating in them. So how come Herschel Walker was involved in an election that occurred in the year 2022 here in Georgia? And it just so happens, out of all the Senate races going on in the United States, Herschel Walker is involved in the only one of these that's going to a runoff. And in my limited research, Georgia is really the only state that does these runoffs like this. The reason they're doing a runoff is because neither candidate won more than 50% of the vote. And think about how ridiculous that is. I mean, essentially, Georgia is saying that there has to be two political parties on the ballot and no more, which is really a huge part of what's wrong with politics in this country, is that you have the left wing and the right wing without anybody realizing that both wings belong to the same bird. So first of all, Herschel Walker running in Georgia. The name Herschel comes from Yiddish, where it has a meaning of deer or buck. Well, of course, there's a sports team named the Bucks, and on the eve of the election, I should say, November 7th, the Bucks lost their first game of the season to the team from Georgia, the Atlanta Hawks, who scored 117 points on 11-7. And of course, no coincidences here. Notice how the Bucks scored 98 points. The word Senate equals 98. The phrase Georgia Senate runoff equals 98. And the guy who will almost certainly win this race, Raphael Gamaliel Warnock, his name sums to 98. Of course, Wisconsin and Georgia are infinitely linked in mainstream culture, as these are the only two states that have reduction gematria of 44. Wisconsin 44, Georgia 44. Consider how the governor of Georgia is Brian Kemp. The name Brian Kemp equals 44, and Brian equals 44. And this guy won re-election on the same date that Tony Evers won re-election. And both of these guys won their original election on the same day. And the name Tony Evers also equals 44. Again, all of these guys just playing their roles, assuming their positions in our fake, rigged, scripted, staged elections. So, again, let's talk about the deeper astronomical riddle, which explains why Herschel Walker was involved in this year's election. This year, on November 8th, which was Election Day, this happened to be the same date as a total lunar eclipse, the second one of the year to have occurred. And if you go down and read a little bit about this eclipse, you'll find an interesting detail. During this year's eclipse, while the moon was red, it occulted the planet Uranus. And here's a picture there. Uranus, the seventh planet in the solar system, slipping behind the moon, as visible from certain parts of the world, such as Japan. And this is pretty rare. I mean, the moon has been occulting Uranus a lot, but for this to occur during an eclipse is highly uncommon. So what's so significant about this? The planet Uranus was discovered by a man named William Herschel. Now, I brought this up in a previous post. This is nothing new, but I want to talk more about the numerology here. Think about this election occurring on November 8th, or 11/8. 11/8. This was a huge number in the World Series this year, as we just finished up the 118th World Series, which was won by the Astros as a tribute to the moon landing, 118. In the post-game celebration, we even heard manager Dusty Baker say that Yordan Alvarez hit a home run over the moon. And the next United States Congress, which Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock are competing for, will be the 118th edition of the Congress. Raphael Warnock was born on a date with primary numerology of 118, and he is very likely to be the next senator in Georgia. Senator equals 118. If you write out the number 118, it has matching gematria with Herschel Jr. Walker, 305 and 100. But here's where things get really ridiculous. When you write out the number 118, you get an ordinal value of 200. Using capital letters, the name Herschel Walker equals 200. Measuring from the death of William Herschel, who discovered Uranus, to the date of this runoff election, it'll be 200 years and 104 days. 104 connects to the gematria of U.S. Senate, the race occurring between Warnock, which sums to 104 reverse, and Herschel, which sums to 104 with capital letters. The planet Uranus sums to 22 in reduction. And consider how this year, 22, when Walker is running, and William Herschel even died in the year 22, all connecting to the gematria of Uranus. Now, the Georgia Senate runoff will be held on December 6th. December 6th is written 12/6. Think about how Georgia Senate sums to 126 in ordinal. But Again, this is all connected to eclipses. And in the Bible, there's a verse that mentions both a solar and lunar eclipse. Revelation 6:12. 6:12 is how December 6th is written in most parts of the world. 6:12 connects to the governor of Georgia, Brian Porter Kemp, whose name sums to 612. But notice how his name also sums to 224. Well, the next total solar eclipse falls in the year 2024. And if you measure from the date that Brian Kemp took office, January 14th, to the date of the runoff, it'll be 1,423 days. And that's the 224th prime number. If you measure from the Georgia Senate race to the next Great American Eclipse in 2024, you get 489 days. Well, 489 is the value of Georgia Senate race, 489. And I'm almost certain that Warnock will walk away with that victory. Warnock was born on the date July 23rd or 23/7, which is the Latin value of Brian Kemp. But let's take a look at this lunar eclipse once again. This lunar eclipse belonged to Saros series 136. We talked about this number a little bit earlier when we discussed the whole Louisville, Kentucky ritual. And what I actually forgot to mention in that is that the Milwaukee Bucks scored 136 points in a game that was connected to this. Maybe this was in this post. Yeah, it was. So this eclipse that occurred on the date of Election Day belonged to Saros 136, and the runoff election will fall 136 days after the birthday of Raphael Warnock. Look at how a lunar eclipse and a hybrid eclipse both equal 136. Well, there's also a hybrid eclipse that occurs next year, and the runoff will be held 136 days before that eclipse. Once again, this is a number connected to the Jesuits. The Jesuits equals 136. The Jesuits were founded 3 days before an eclipse from Saros 136. And Saros 136 began just hours after 13/6 in the year 1360. And the Bucks, of course, Herschel means buck in Yiddish. Well, the day after the election, the Bucks scored 136 points. A lot of coincidences there, aren't there? All right, so I got 3 more stories to get through. We're already an hour in, but it looks like we're going to go a little long today, so let's keep this going. This week in the NFL, the Indianapolis Colts made a surprising move when they fired head coach Frank Reich and made a surprising move to hire Jeff Saturday. Jeff Saturday, a longtime center for the Indianapolis Colts during some of their most successful years with Peyton Manning. Now, Jeff Saturday has no coaching experience above the high school level, yet Colts owner Jim Irsay decided that he was the right man for the job. And of course, the media, never passes up an opportunity to put a headline out there with race bait in it. So they want to make you think that this is a slight on black coaches when in reality, it's a numeric riddle. Now, the name Jeff Saturday is very intriguing because, of course, Saturday is the day of the week named after the planet Saturn. We'll talk about how that connects as we go. But November 7th, an interesting date. It falls 142 days after Jeff Saturday's 18/6 birthday, June 18th. Digits found in the Gematria of November 7th. The date he was hired had numerology of 60, 11 plus 7 plus 20 plus 22. And the man who was fired from his role, Frank Reich, was 60 years old. And his name, Frank Reich, equals 60. Indianapolis also equals 60 in reduction. Now, when Frank Reich turned 60 years old last year, he did so on the date of this total solar eclipse. Solar eclipse of December 4th. Now, the name Frank Michael Reich has gematria of 864. This is connected to the sun, which is approximately 864,000 miles in diameter. There's 86,400 seconds in a day. The sun is approximately 93 million miles from Earth. And notice how the name Frank Reich has gematria of 93. In the year 93, Frank Reich led the largest comeback in NFL history, both regular season and playoffs. This game was called The Comeback, featuring Frank Reich. And look at how the phrase head coach equals 93. Indianapolis Colts equal 93 with the S exception. He's being replaced by Jeffrey Bryant Saturday, whose name equals 93. And Saturday gets his name from the planet Saturn. And Saturn equals 93. Saturn having to do with death and destruction. God's Son, who was crucified on the cross, equals 93. Crucifix equals 93. Jesus of Nazareth, which equals 93. Jesus crucified as darkness falls over the sky, like an eclipse. If you look up the Indianapolis Colts, you'll find that their next loss will be their 487th loss. And 487 is the 93rd prime number. So if I had to guess, the Colts will probably lose their next game. I don't even know who they're playing. Don't put your money on that. Just saying. It really lines up with the number 93. The first ever eclipse, which is said to have been successfully predicted by man, was in the year 585 BC. This was called the Eclipse of Thales. And if you measure between the birthdays of Jim Irsay, who hired Jeff Saturday, and Jeff Saturday, you get 5,850 days. 585. Big eclipse number. And again, he was hired one day before the lunar eclipse. The name Jeff Saturday has gematria of 1423. I just talked about this number because Brian Kemp will have been in office for 1,423 days on the runoff. And Brian Kemp's name equals 224. Well, the 2024 total solar eclipse also passes directly over the city of Indianapolis. It almost cuts it in half. And Indianapolis is the team that Jeff Saturday is now coaching. Well, measuring from the date he was hired to the date of the next total solar eclipse is exactly 74 weeks. Total solar eclipse equals 704 and 74. Again, this is on the date November 7th, which equals 74. 74, the gematria of Jesus, the King, Messiah, cross, gospel, killing, parables. All 74 in the alphabetic order. Notice how crucifixion of Jesus Christ has the same gematria as Jeffrey Bryant Saturday. 303 and 123. Remember, Jesus was believed to have been crucified in the year 33 at the age of 33. And this all happened one day before the lunar eclipse. Lunar equals 33. Eclipse equals 33. It takes the moon 33 years. Well, I should rephrase that. It takes the lunar calendar 33 years to fall back in sync with the solar calendar. And, of course, Jeffrey Bryant Saturday, also 123, just like crucifixion of Jesus Christ and Indianapolis. 123. So, remember, this eclipse was from Saros 136. We've been talking about this number a lot. 136. Well, look at the name Jeff Saturday. Jeff Saturday equals 136. And he was hired by Jim Irsay, who was born on the 13th of June, or 13/6. The name James Irsay equals 1306. This year's lunar eclipse, Saros 136. And think about how Saros 136, here we have solar Saros 136. We also have lunar Saros 136. Both of these cycles began on a Saturday. June 14th, 1360 was a Saturday. And April 13th of 1680 was a Saturday. And here we're getting the hire of Jeff Saturday. In Hebrew Gematria, the phrase for moon sums to 218 and 223. November 7th equals 218. This was 218 days before Jim Irsay's birthday, and also 223 days before Jeff Saturday's birthday. Numbers connected to the moon. Wow, there's also a lot of 1331 coding, this big eclipse number. I mentioned how Revelation 6:12 has both a solar and lunar eclipse in it. This Bible verse has gematria of 1331. And notice how both Indianapolis and Colts both sum to 393. Well, 393 is the third number to have gematria of 1331. And if you write out 1331, it has the same gematria as Colts, Saturday, and crucifixion, 1139. Now, Saturday gets his name from the planet Saturn. Notice how Saturn has Hebrew gematria of 713, which is the same English value as total eclipse, 713. Frank Reich was hired 1,730 days before he was fired. This number, which has the same digits as 713, is an upside-down Eli. Eli, the name of God that Christ shouts while being crucified on the cross. Frank Reich. I'm sure there's something to this name too, Reich. Kingdom or empire or realm. Of course, the Third Reich is how it was what the Nazi party was referred to. Anyway, Frank Reich was born in the year 61, and Jesus equals 61, so does cross. And the word crucifix sums to 610. There's a big 666 riddle here also, but what I actually wanted to bring attention to was what Pat McAfee, he had Jim Irsay on recently. And crap, I got to find the actual second where this happened. Okay, 35 minutes. Let's play this video for you guys. Because, you know, Jim Irsay, he's a rich fella. He knows what's going on, and he likes to drop hints for the public out there. And he did so on the Pat McAfee show. And I'd like to think that one day Pat McAfee will talk about gematria on his channel, but I'm not exactly holding out hope. Anyway, let's listen to Jim Irsay spill some astronomical knowledge here.
Be a flying car, you know? and honestly, when we shut down the Mars missions, you know, we were supposed to be going in 2024. Whatever happened to the Conqueror? I mean, we were going, you know, from New York to...
My apologies as I sift through this video. We'll find it.
It's like I'm frustrated with flying cars.
Hey, me too.
What on your phone really hours a day like you young people do. No, supposed to be going in 2024, and like, you know, give me a flying car.
Okay, now that we've gone through the nonsense, here's the part where he talks about his knowledge.
And honestly, when we shut down the Mars missions, you know, we were supposed to be going in 2024, and we shut it down. But a lot of people don't realize is, you know, from here to the moon is 208,000 miles roughly. You know, 200. So you can think about that. Well, in this country, you know, a long road trip could be 4,000 miles, and you know how far it is to Australia. You know, so 200,000 miles. You know, that you think about that, and you know that's far, but like Mars. Think about this, is 250 million miles. 250 million miles. So, you know, that's a little different thing because, you know, when you go, you know, it takes about anywhere from, you know, 9 to 11 months to get there, depending on the alignment.
Of course, 9 to 11 months. Of course it does. So, you know, this is just an example of how these rich, wealthy, powerful people like to play with the public a little bit, just dropping nuggets of knowledge. Of course, Irsay said the moon is about 208,000 miles from Earth. That's like how close it gets to Earth. But the average is actually 238,000 miles from Earth. I'd be shocked if he doesn't know that. 238 is the Gematria value of 666, which is a number that's huge to Jeff Saturday, who started his career in Indianapolis in 1999. The 238th prime number is even connected to Jeff Saturday. Wild stuff. All right, a couple more things to talk about here. I want to talk about two recent deaths, both connected to the Washington Commanders, who, of course, used to be the Redskins. And we start with the passing of former Redskins legend Dave Butz. Maybe legend isn't the right word, but a lineman who had a big hand in their success and won 2 Super Bowls under head coach Joe Gibbs, who we'll talk about next. So first of all, Dave Butz dying on a date with standard numerology of 37. The name Dave Butz and his full name, David Butz, both have Gematria of 37. But let's look at the name Dave Butz in ordinal. Using the alphabetic order, Dave Butz equals 101. And it just so happened that Dave Butz died 101 days before Super Bowl 57, which is on February 12th next year, dying a span of 101 days before the Super Bowl. And look at the date he died. It had primary numerology of 57, and it also leaves 57 days in the year. Butz's old team, the Redskins, are now called the Commanders, and Commanders has Gematria of 57. 57 is a number connected to our lovely moon, which has a 57-degree range of declination. The word moon equals 57 in English. In Hebrew, the word eclipse equals 57. But notice how moon equals 21 in reduction, matching the Gematria of Butz, 21. And the date he died had reduced numerology of 21. 21 happens to be the reduction value of the word Jesuit. And I want to talk about how the numerology of the Jesuit order is very significant to this story in particular. Dave Butz was born on June 23rd, which is the date that leaves 191 days in the year. This is a number that connects to the Jesuit order, which is also known as the Society of Jesus. Society of Jesus sums to 191 in ordinal. In Latin ordinal, total solar eclipse equals 191. And Dave Butz died 1,901 days after the first Great American Total Solar Eclipse. And I want you to think more about this name, Butz. In one of my recent live streams, I talked about the Jeffrey Dahmer story and how this was connected to annular eclipses. The word annular is not that dissimilar from the word anus. And an annular eclipse is called a ring of fire eclipse. It gives you this circle. And the Jesuit order, the perverts at the top of this society, make this connection with a butt, with an asshole. And this was highly prevalent in the story about Jeffrey Dahmer, who was this unusually gay serial killer, right? And his death, or his baptism, occurred on the same date as an annular eclipse, which split the states of Wisconsin and Ohio, which is where he committed his murders. So this all had to do with annular eclipses and the Jesuit order, whose symbol is like an eclipsed sun. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer equals 191, just like Society of Jesus. So now here we go again, this time with a guy named Butz. The Jesuit order symbol even reads the word shit upside down, which is what comes out of an asshole. I mean, this stuff really is that disgusting. So, Dave Butz dies at the age of 72. And this is within a day where legendary NFL punter Ray Guy, he dies at 72. And think about the name Ray, like rays of the sun, which surround the Jesuit emblem. The phrase Jesuit order has gematria of 72, which is the age that both Ray Guy and Dave Butz died on. Now, next year, we have an annular eclipse that occurs during a hybrid eclipse. The phrase hybrid eclipse sums to 72 in reduction and reverse reduction. So Dave Butz dies at 72, and notice how he played a total of 216 games in his career. Hybrid eclipse equals 216. With capital letters, the name David Butz equals 216. So, if you measure from his death to the date of the next hybrid eclipse on April 20th of next year, you get 167 days. 167 is the 39th prime number. Notice how the name Butz equals 39, the word hybrid equals 39, and the word eclipse equals 39. But what makes this even crazier is that Dave Butz died exactly 33 weeks before his next birthday. The word hybrid also equals 33. The word eclipse also equals 33. Sun equals 33, so does the sun. The number 69 is the ordinal value of eclipse and the reduction value of annular eclipse. Of course, 69, slang for a sex act, like what Jeffrey Dahmer probably did. The name Butz also sums to 69 in ordinal. In fact, the name Dave Butz equals 690. The name David Butz equals 69 in Fibonacci. Think about how 69 minutes on a clock is 1 hour and 9 minutes. The name David Butz, also with this 109. He used to be a Redskin, which equals 109. Finally, the number 44 was coded in here as well. The word kill equals 44. And the Washington Commanders currently have a 4-4 record. Actually, they did at the time. Their next game was against the Vikings. And notice how the Vikings equals 44. Dave Butz was born on a date with a life lesson number of 44. And he died on November 4th. Well, the number 44 has factors of 11 times 4. And he dies on November 4th, 11-4. November 4th is also exactly 44 weeks into the year. And notice how the name Dave Butz has matching gematria with 44, 1,512. In fact, 44 also syncs up with Redskins. So we get this death connected to the Redskins. Well, the very next day after we learned about this, we got a news story about the death of Coy Gibbs, who was the son of Joe Gibbs, who was Dave Butz's coach when he won those Super Bowls. And not only is that a crazy coincidence, but Coy Gibbs died the same day that his son won the Xfinity NASCAR Series Championship. I mean, this stuff it's going over the top with coincidence here. This guy dying just hours after his own son wins the Xfinity Series Championship. So, once again, a story connected to the sun. Coy Gibbs has the full name Coy Randall Gibbs. And notice how this name also has gematria of 864, a number we mentioned earlier. Who was that connected to, 864? I forget, but I just mentioned it. Anyway, this is also the value of Xfinity in Latin gematria, 864. Big sun number. Coy Gibbs was born on December 9th, or 12/9. And if you measure to the next hybrid eclipse, which occurs in 2023, which is the eclipse that Dave Butz died in connection to, notice how this eclipse belongs to Saros 129. Coy Gibbs, born on 12/9. He also died 167 days before that same eclipse. Again, 167 is the 39th prime number, and not only does Butz equal 39, but the name Gibbs also equals 39. Just like hybrid, just like eclipse. Coy's son Ty Gibbs had won the Xfinity Championship just hours earlier. Notice how the name Ty Gibbs is 39 with the S exception. The Washington Commanders lost their 647th game in franchise history against the Vikings. The number 647 is a prime number. This would be the 118th prime number. This is a number connected to death and homicide. Of course, we just had the 118th World Series. There were a couple of deaths connected to that as well. See my video on Vince Dooley. Let's take another look at this guy's full name. Coy Randall Gibbs, summing to 1089. Notice how 1089 is 33 squared. We just mentioned how important this number was. Hybrid and eclipse both summing to 33. Coy's father was Joe Gibbs. The name Joe Gibbs equals 33. The name Gibbs also equals 33. Joe Gibbs was born on the 330th day of a leap year. Ty Gibbs won the Xfinity Championship in Phoenix. And that race at Phoenix was the final race of the circuit, and it was the 33rd race of the series. This race was even held in Phoenix, which is on the 33rd parallel. Phoenix is abbreviated PHX, which equals 33 in reverse. And if you measure from Ty Gibbs' birthday to the date his dad died, it was 33 days. In fact, news of Coy's death broke 33 days before his own birthday. In this image, we see how the number 33 connects to both ritual human sacrifice. Well, it connects to ritual sacrifice, human sacrifice, and ritual human sacrifice in Gematria. But this 156 is also a big eclipse number. Eclipses only occur 1, 5, or 6 lunar phases after the last one. In Hebrew, the word for eclipse equals 156. In English, eclipse the sun and plane of the sun both equal 156. Coy Gibbs was the co-owner of Joe Gibbs Racing, but he's not the first co-owner of Joe Gibbs Racing to die. Back in 2019, his brother J.D. Gibbs also passed away from a really rare degenerative neurological disorder. And notice how J.D. Gibbs died 1,560 days before that same eclipse. This is also 223 weeks. 223 is the number of synodic months in the Saros cycle, which allows us to predict the next eclipse. Notice how the phrase solar eclipse equals 134. This matches both Coy Gibbs and J.D. Gibbs, who both died in connection to the same solar eclipse. But let's take a deeper look into this ritual sacrifice code. Measuring from the date that Coy Gibbs died to his father's next birthday, it was 21 days. The name Gibbs equals 21, so does Phoenix abbreviated. Joe Gibbs would have been 82 years old. That's the ordinal value of Coy Gibbs, 82. His son had just won the Xfinity Championship, Xfinity 82. 82 is the value of ritual sacrifice with the S exception. Joe Gibbs is still currently 81 years old. Notice how 81 is the double value of ritual. Ritual 81 and 81. In Latin Gematria, ritual equals 410. Ty Gibbs, Joe's grandson, was born on 410, the 4th of October. And he just won the 41st Xfinity Championship. Notice how the name Ty Gibbs equals 630? That's the English value of ritual. I thought it was cool that his full name also matches Xfinity Series 169. The name Gibbs equals 110 in Latin Gematria. And in numerology, this represents the number 11. Well, J.D. Gibbs used to race the 11 car for NASCAR, and then he died on the 11th day of the year. Well, 11 squared is 121. Notice how Joe Gibbs Racing sums to 121. Joe Gibbs Racing is a perfect overlap in Gematria with blood sacrifice. 121, 257, 6786. Coy died 257 days after his brother's birthday. J.D. Gibbs would currently be 53 years old. The name J.D. Gibbs equals 53, just like solar eclipse, 53. But notice how this phrase blood sacrifice has a Latin value of 332. Measuring from Coy's birthday to his death was 332 days. All right, everyone. So that does it for the decodes today. Pretty meaty video. We went almost 90 minutes, just like we used to. It's good to get back in the swing of things, isn't it? All right, guys. So, as you know, this work is now viewer-supported. So if you like what you saw, you want to see more live streams in the future, you want to see this knowledge shared more at a greater level, there's a couple ways to support. You can go to gematrinator.com/memberships. The cheapest memberships are about $4 a month. Or donations through PayPal, also accepted. And again, we're trying to make this website self-sustainable so that I can continue making these videos full-time. And that will also grow the website with many new things. Games, quizzes, a good archive for historical decodes. I want to turn gematrinator.com into the ultimate resource for Gematria through history and whatnot. So more to come on that. I've talked a little bit about plans in previous live streams, but still more to come. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to y'all next time. See ya.